My name is Judith Harper. I'm 56 years old. And I learned something that night in front of 50 guests, crystal chandeliers, and a champagne fountain tall enough to feed a small village. Blood doesn't humiliate you in private. It does it with a microphone. My sister Diane's engagement party was hosted at my parents' country club. 50 people, doctors, attorneys, investors, the kind of crowd that says bless your heart and means know your place. Dad stood at the head of the room. Tuxedo pressed, silver hair perfect, glass raised high. To my successful daughter, he boomed. Smiling at Diane, or pride and joy. A partner at her firm by 45. Marrying into the Whitmore family. Applause, laughter, clinking. Glasses. Diane beamed like she'd personally cured. I sat at table 7. Not the family table. Table 7. I kept eating my salad. Dad wasn't finished, and he continued, voice shifting into the playful tone he uses when he's about to wound someone. Let's not forget Judith. A few polite heads turned. She's still, how shall we say this? Loyal, he smirked. Still in love with that farmer boyfriend of hers. The word farmer rolled off his tongue like it tasted sour. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. 50 guests, 50 witnesses. And, after all these years, he added, she still hasn't figured out that dirt doesn't turn into gold. More laughter. My mother didn't look at me. Diane sipped her champagne. I kept eating, slowly, calmly, silent. Here's what you need to understand. When you grow up the invisible daughter, you learn early that reacting feeds them, silence starves them. For 56 years, I was the practical one. The backup plan. The daughter who stayed close to home. Who didn't chase prestige. Who didn't marry a surgeon or a CEO. I chose Daniel. Yes. Daniel owns farmland. Yes. He wears boots more often than loafers. And yes. My family has treated him like he tracked mud onto their Persian rugs for the past 10 years. What they never bothered to ask was what kind of farmer he actually was. Dad raised his glass again. To success, he declared loudly. And to daughters who know how to choose wisely. The room roared. That's when Daniel stood up. And across the room, Diane's future father-in-law stopped mid-sip, stared at Daniel, and said four words that changed everything. Wait. That's you. And just like that the whole room went dead quiet. Wait. That's you. The words didn't echo. They dropped out heavy. Final. Every fork paused mid-air. Every whisper collapsed into nothing. Even the string quartet in the corner faltered into silence. Diane's future father-in-law Charles Whitmore himself was staring at Daniel like he'd just seen a ghost step out of a boardroom. Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't rush to explain. He simply turned, polite as ever, and said, "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore." My father blinked. "You two know each other?" he asked, forcing a laugh that sounded thin. Charles didn't answer him. He stepped forward. "You're Daniel Mercer," he said slowly. "Founder of Mercer Agritech." A murmur spread through the room. Agritech. Not farmer. Not dirt. Daniel inclined his head. "Yes, sir." My father's smile began to crack. Charles looked around at the guests. The same Mercer Agritech that just secured the federal sustainability contract. Gasps. Someone near the bar whispered, "That's the billion-dollar irrigation expansion." Another voice, "The one featured in Forbes last quarter." Daniel didn't brag. He didn't posture. He just stood there in his tailored navy suit, the one my mother said looked too plain for tonight. My father's face drained of color. "Surely that's coincidence," he muttered. Charles turned slowly toward him. "No coincidence," he said. "I've been trying to schedule a meeting with Mr. Mercer for 6 months. 6 months. My father had mocked him for 10 years. I kept my napkin folded neatly on my lap. Silent. Because here's the thing my family never understood. Real wealth doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly. Patiently. Strategically. While other people are busy laughing. Diane's hand tightened around her fiancé's arm. "You didn't tell me," she whispered to him. Her fiancé looked confused. "I thought you knew." "Knew what?" "That the poor farmer owned over 40,000 acres across 3 states. That he pioneered water conservation tech now being adopted internationally. That he'd been invited to testify before Congress twice." My father tried to recover. "Well," he chuckled awkwardly, "that's impressive, son. Why didn't you ever mention it?" Daniel finally looked at him directly. His voice was calm, controlled. "You never asked." Silence. Thick. Humiliating. But Daniel wasn't done. He reached into his jacket pocket. And when he pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward Charles Whitmore, I realized tonight wasn't just about correcting an insult. It was about an announcement. And my father had just handed Daniel the microphone. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He turned his phone so only Charles Whitmore could see it at first. I watched Charles' eyebrows lift just slightly. Then Daniel said, calmly, the board meets tomorrow morning, correct? Charles nodded slowly. Yes, and the acquisition vote is still scheduled. My father's fork clattered onto his plate. Acquisition. He repeated. Now Daniel turned the phone outward so the glow of the screen was visible to everyone at the head table. I was going to wait until Monday, he said evenly. But since we're all gathered. He glanced at me. Not for permission. For timing. For tenures. My family called him dirt, mud, small town. Beneath us. They never realized farmland had been quietly buying the city. Charles cleared his throat. The Whitmore Group has been negotiating a strategic partnership. Strategic partnership. That's what billionaires call leverage. Diane's fiancé looked pale now. Dad, what partnership? Charles didn't break eye contact with Daniel. Mercer Agritech will become the primary infrastructure supplier for our global expansion. A murmur exploded across the room. Primary. Global. Infrastructure. My father forced a laugh that sounded like it hurt. Well, that's wonderful. Diane marrying into such a visionary family, and now this. Charles finally looked at him. No, he said carefully. You misunderstand. The room froze again. Partnership shifts. Controlling interest. Controlling interest. The words didn't need explanation. My father's hand tightened around his wine glass. You're selling? He asked sharply. Charles didn't answer him. He answered the room. As of tomorrow's vote, Mercer Agritech will hold majority control over the Whitmore development portfolio. The development portfolio. The one Diane had bragged about all night. The one my father had just toasted as the future of our family. Legacy. Daniel slipped his phone back into his pocket. Still calm, still steady. For clarity, he added gently. That includes the country club land lease. You could hear the blood draining from faces. This country club. The one my father bragged he'd helped secure. The one hosting tonight's engagement. Owned. Or about to be. By the poor farmer. Diane's champagne glass trembled in her hand. My mother finally looked at me. Not with pity. Not with dismissal. With fear. My father's voice dropped low. You're joking. Daniel met his stare. I don't joke about land. And that's when my father realized something devastating. He hadn't just mocked the wrong man. He had mocked the man who now owned the ground beneath his feet. And I hadn't even started speaking yet. For 10 years, I had imagined this moment. Not the applause. Not the gasps. The silence. The kind that makes people feel the weight of their own words. My father set his wine glass down too hard. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You expect me to believe you're buying out the Whitmores? Daniel didn't rise to it. I don't expect you to believe anything, he said calmly. The paperwork is already filed. Past tense. That's when I finally placed my fork down. Softly. The sound carried. 50 heads turned toward me. For 10 years, I had been the afterthought. The spare daughter. The one who settled. I stood. My father loves a toast, I said evenly. So I'd like to offer one. He stared at me like I'd broken a rule. Judith, my mother hissed, sit down. I didn't. I want to thank my parents, I continued, for teaching me the value of silence. A few uncomfortable laughs. They taught me that reacting gives people power. That dignity is quiet. I looked directly at my father. And they taught me that when someone shows you who they are in public, believe them. His jaw tightened. Daniel moved closer beside me, but he didn't touch me. He didn't need to rescue me. I wasn't the embarrassed one anymore. You see, I said, turning slightly so the whole room could hear, while everyone here was busy laughing at Dirt. Dirt was buying water rights. A ripple of whispers. And water, I added gently, is the future. Charles Whitmore nodded almost imperceptibly. My father's voice lowered. Judith, stop this. I smiled at him. The same polite smile I'd worn for decades. You called him dirt, I said quietly. But dirt feeds cities. Dirt builds wealth. Dirt sustains life. The room was so still it felt fragile. And the man you just mocked, I continued, has spent the last decade building irrigation systems that now control over 30% of the agricultural supply chain in this region. 30%, you could see people calculating. You could see alliances shifting. Diane's fiancé looked like he was reevaluating every conversation he'd ever had with Daniel. My father stood abruptly. Enough. But it wasn't. Because Daniel leaned toward Charles and said something low enough that only the head table could hear, except I caught it. About the club's lease renewal, he said smoothly. We'll need to revisit the membership structure. That's when my father understood. The board vote tomorrow wouldn't just shift power. It would decide who got to stay and who didn't. And suddenly, the man who had raised a glass to mock us was standing on land he no longer controlled. But this wasn't revenge yet. This was only leverage. And I had one more thing to reveal. Something my father would never recover from. I let the silence stretch. Silence is uncomfortable for people who rely on noise to control a room. My father cleared his throat. Judith, whatever this is, we can discuss it privately. Privately. Now he wanted privacy. I almost laughed. For 10 years, I said evenly, you've discussed my relationship publicly. Tonight feels appropriate. A few guests shifted in their chairs. Daniel remained still beside me, steady, grounded, immovable. I reached into my purse. Not for drama. For documentation. My father's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? Finishing what you started. I pulled out a thin cream envelope. The same kind my father uses for formal correspondence. Heavy, embossed, recognizable. I received this 3 weeks ago. I said. I held it up. It was addressed to Daniel. Not to me. My mother looked confused. Diane looked irritated. My father looked wary. Go on, he said tightly. It was a membership review notice. A murmur moved through the guests again. This club, I continued, conducted a background reassessment on Daniel when his company began acquiring land in the region. Charles Whitmore shifted slightly. They flag him as inconsistent with legacy standards. The words tasted ugly. Inconsistent with legacy standards. I repeated, meaning not the right schools. Not the right pedigree. Not the right zip code growing up. But Daniel didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply purchased the land beneath the standards. My father's jaw hardened. The board makes those decisions. Yes, I nodded. And tomorrow, the board changes. The room absorbed that. Slowly. Carefully. But that's not the part one wanted to share. I opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of a quiet land transaction, one my father hadn't seen coming. You see, I continued, while Mercer Agritech was negotiating with the Whitmores. I looked directly at my father. I was negotiating something else. His eyes flickered. Confusion. Then calculation. Then dread. For the past 4 years, I said calmly, I've been purchasing minority shares in Harper Development. My father's face went white. Harper Development. His company, the company he built, the company he constantly reminded me I would never inherit. Diane's fiancé whispered, what? I started small. I continued. Retirement accounts, silent partnerships, divested holdings from investors who were tired of stagnant growth. My father's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. That's impossible, is it? I tilted my head gently, because as of this afternoon, I let the words land carefully. I hold 38%. Controlling interest. The room didn't just go quiet. It imploded. My father staggered back into his chair. 30-8%. Combined with Daniel's incoming leverage through Whitmore expansion control wasn't theoretical anymore. It was mathematical. You wouldn't, he breathed. I smiled softly. For years, I said. You told me dirt doesn't turn into gold. I stepped closer. But it does, if you planned it properly. And that's when I told him the part that would end his reign completely. I'm calling a board vote tomorrow morning. Before he ever recovers from tonight, you could actually see it happening. The shift, not in the room. In my father, for the first time in my 56 years, he wasn't controlling the narrative, he was reacting to it. A board vote, he repeated, but the authority was gone from his voice. Yes, I said calmly. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Diane stood abruptly. Judith, this is insane. You don't even work there. I looked at her gently. You never asked what I've been doing for the last decade. Silence again. That silence had become my ally. For the past 11 years, I continued, while you were expanding Harper Development into luxury condos and speculative retail. I turned to the guests. I was restructuring its debt. My father froze. That got his attention. You always wondered, I said quietly to him, why your interest rates suddenly improved 3 years ago. His eyes widened. You thought it was loyalty from the banks. I shook my head. Slightly. It was leverage. The truth settled over the table like fog. I bought distressed notes tied to Harper's secondary projects, quietly, through intermediaries. When COVID hit and liquidity tightened, I was already positioned. One of the attorneys at table 3 muttered. She refinanced him. Yes, I said simply. My father stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. You needed breathing room, I continued. I gave it to you, and you never knew. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't need to. This wasn't his reveal. It was mine. For years, I said, voice steady, you told everyone I chose small. That I lacked ambition. That I settled. I leaned slightly forward. I didn't settle. I studied. The room was dead quiet again. You taught me business at this very table, I reminded him. You taught me to read balance sheets before I could drive. You taught me that control isn't loud. It's structural. His breathing had changed, faster, Now, you positioned yourself against your own family, he said hoarsely. I shook my head. No, I positioned myself in case my family ever turned against me. That landed hard. Diane looked like she wanted to scream. But even she understood something now. This wasn't emotional revenge. It was strategic correction. As of tomorrow, I continued. I'll motion for a governance review. My father swallowed. And with Daniel's incoming infrastructure contract shifting regional land valuations, I let him finish the math himself. Harper Development's flagship expansion project. It required Mercer water access. Without it, delayed. Devalued. Dangerous. You wouldn't sabotage your own company, he whispered. I held his gaze. You publicly humiliated my husband in front of 50 guests. You questioned his worth. You questioned mine. I paused. But here's the difference. Between you and me, I don't destroy what I build. I restructure it. The weight of that promise settled heavily. But Dad, I added softly, if the board decides new leadership is necessary. He looked up sharply. Yes. I finished. Your seat is on the agenda. And for the first time in my life my father looked small. The music never restarted. No one touched their champagne. The entire room was suspended in that terrible, beautiful silence that only comes when power changes hands. My father straightened his jacket like fabric could restore authority. You're emotional, he said finally. This is about embarrassment. I almost felt sorry for him. No, I replied calmly. This is about correction. Diane stepped closer to him. Dad built this company from nothing, she snapped at me. You don't get to just walk in and take it. I looked at her. I didn't walk in, I said. I invested in. There's a difference, a big one. For 11 years, I continued. I sat at this table and listened while you all discussed expansion strategies, bond issuances, tax positioning. You assumed I wasn't paying attention. My father's voice sharpened. You're bluffing. 38% isn't control. Alone, I agreed. No, and that's when Daniel spoke again. Quiet. Measured. Double quotes, but combined with my acquisition of the Whitmore development pipeline. He let it hang. The pipeline that Harper Development desperately needed to stay competitive. The pipeline tied to water infrastructure. His infrastructure, and, I added softly, the 3 board members who've already agreed to support governance reform. My father's head snapped toward me. Who? He demanded. I didn't answer, because I didn't need to. The attorney from table 3 stood slowly. Then the investor from table 5. And, finally Mr. Caldwell. My father's oldest business ally. He didn't look at Dad. He looked at me. I'm tired of watching you sideline the only person in this family who understands long-term risk, Caldwell said quietly. Diane looked like someone had knocked the air out of her lungs. My mother gripped the back of her chair. You've all been meeting behind my back. My father asked, voice cracking just slightly. Not behind your back. I corrected. In front of your ego. A few guests actually inhaled sharply at that. But here's the truth my father never understood. Ego blinds you to quiet movements. He thought Diane was his heir because she mirrored him. But mirrors don't expand empires, they reflect them. You taught me one thing well, I told him. Never build your future on noise, you build on status. I build on assets. Daniel's hand brushed mine briefly. Not to steady me. To remind me we were aligned. My father's eyes darted around the room, searching for loyalty, but loyalty follows stability. And tonight, stability had shifted. This isn't over, he said. But it sounded like a plea. I stepped closer, lowered my voice so only he could hear. It was over the moment you decided humiliation was leadership. Then I straightened. And tomorrow morning, I smiled politely, we formalize it. But what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already set something else in motion, something that would make losing his seat look merciful. And when it hit, he wouldn't just lose control, he would lose reputation. And in his world, that was fatal. Reputation. My father valued it more than money. More than loyalty. More than me. The guests slowly began whispering again, but not with amusement this time. Not with superiority. With calculation. My father straightened, trying to salvage something. Even if this vote passes, he said tightly, it changes nothing publicly. Publicly. There it was, his real fear. Daniel glanced at me. It was time. You're right, I said calmly. Board votes are internal. I let the room relax slightly, but regulatory filings aren't. They're shifted again. For the past year, I continued. I've also been conducting an independent audit. My father's jaw locked. An audit of what? Diane demanded. Harper Development's secondary land acquisitions. You could almost hear the blood draining from faces. My father had always operated aggressively. Leveraged land. Pushed zoning edges. Played with valuation timing. He called it smart. Regulators sometimes called it something else. I didn't initiate it maliciously, I said evenly. I initiated it because minority shareholders have rights. Caldwell gave a slow nod. I uncovered irregularities. I continued. My father's voice dropped to a whisper. Judith. Nothing criminal, I said calmly. Yet. But enough. Exposure. That word did it. Exposure. In his world, perception was oxygen, and I was slowly lowering the mask. I gave you 12 months, I said quietly, just loud enough for the head table to hear. 12 months to self-correct the reporting discrepancies. He looked at me like I'd stabbed him. You never brought this to me. I tried, I said. You laughed, and that was true. 3 Christmases ago. One summer. Dinner. One charity gala. Every time I hinted at tightening compliance, he dismissed me, because I was Judith, the quiet one, the one who settled. The SEC receives a minority shareholder disclosure packet at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I said gently. Diane gasped. You wouldn't. I would, I corrected softly. Because once governance shifts, transparency becomes protection. The room felt electric. Charles Whitmore exhaled slowly. My father gripped the edge of the table. You're destroying the company? No. I said, I'm stabilizing it. Daniel's voice entered. Again low and steady, and Mercer Agritech stands ready to support restructuring. Support. Not rescue. Support implied choice. My father's eyes were glassy now. Not with tears, with panic. Judith, he said, voice almost pleading. We're family. There it was, the word that only appeared when leverage disappeared. I looked at him carefully. For 50 guests, I said softly. You made family a performance, and tonight. I glanced around the silent ballroom. It became a reckoning. Diane looked shattered. My mother looked lost. Caldwell looked relieved. And my father. He finally understood something devastating. This wasn't revenge born in anger. It was built in patience. Structured. Layered. I hadn't exploded. I had prepared. The string quartet began playing again hesitantly. But the party was over. The power had shifted. And tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. the board would vote. At 10 a.m. the regulators would receive documentation. And by noon Harper Development would belong to someone who understood that dignity isn't loud. It's strategic. But as Daniel and I walked toward the exit, my father called after me. One mistake, he said hoarsely. And it all collapses. I turned. Met his eyes, and gave him the one truth he never saw coming. I already accounted for that, and tomorrow he would learn just how thoroughly.